quickly introduce Varun first, okay? Varun used to be at Goldman, which is supposed to be a really great place to work and make money. uh, Obviously, that didn't work out for him, and he wanted to be an entrepreneur. Um, uh, he's the co-founder of Headout, which is a travel startup. I'll ask Varun to explain exactly what Headout does, so you have clarity. Um, Varun was part of the Forbes, the 30 under 30 one. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was last year.
I was the oldest participant on that list.
Right, right. So that happened last year. Okay. Yeah. So I'll let Varun sort of lay the ground for us as to what Headstart does, and then we'll sort of jump into it. Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Hey, pleasure to be here. Good to see all of you guys. Hope everybody's staying safe, staying healthy, and doing what they can to help around. In terms of what I do, my day job, afternoon job, night job, every single job possible at this point in time is running Headout. Headout is home to some of the world's most exceptional real life experiences. We are the destination where you can find interesting things to do in 52 cities around the world right now. Everything from New York to London to Dubai to Singapore to Sydney. And we are constantly sort of expanding. What I mean when I say exceptional experiences, which are real life, are experiences for which you would want to be able to want to head out, like get out, get up from your sofa and like want to get on the real world out there, go to a museum, see a site that you haven't seen, meet people that you haven't met, pick up an activity or a hobby that you've never indulged in. We build and we bring all of that together into a single place in a way that ensures that one, you're inspired to do it, and then hopefully once you do it, it's also been something that's not educational, but something that definitely is memorable, that sticks with you. So that's Headout. We've been doing this for about 6 years now, and started out of New York as our home city, and then kept moving from one market to another, and today we are in 52. And looking forward to being a part of the recovery. I think the reason for starting Headout was, giving people around the world a reason to sort of, as the word says, head out. Like literally, that's kind of where the name of the company comes from. And COVID was a stark reminder to us that the mission that we are on is probably even more relevant today, because people are genuinely scared of doing that for very good reason. But the world is just too good a place to sort of miss out on. And so we're hoping that we can play a critical, important role in that recovery going forward. And that's what the focus of the entire team is. So that's me, and that's Head Out. And yeah, happy to be here.
Hey, no, yeah, that's great. How have things been? Yeah, but I guess what 1.5 years of pain now. I think the last time that we spoke was around this time last year,
Yeah.
where I was trying to understand from you what do you expect will happen to the travel market. Um, how's it been the whole of last year?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's been an evolving story. It's not done yet, right? And so everything that I say is going to continue for a while. But the world changed quite dramatically, not just for us, but for a bunch of companies and a bunch of people around the world, especially in travel. And we were not, immune to that. Pre-COVID, Headout was doing roughly about 200 million in annual sales, which is a sizable number. That number fell from that scale to something that was, extremely, extremely small, in a matter of weeks. We also had a situation where there were multiple weeks in April where there was not a single experience on Headout that was available to be sold, because everything in the world was just shut. And it's even more sort of relevant for Headout because we predominantly focus on urban centers around the world. Our experiences happen in urban cities, and so urban cities were the ones that are most affected. Uh, we rely on public institutions and public spaces to be able to run our experiences, and those were the first ones to get clamped down. So it was brutal. It has been brutal, and it continues to be brutal in no uncertain terms. However, there have been two things that have happened which gives us tremendous reason for optimism. One is in places which have opened up, the likes of Dubai, Sydney, Singapore, and the US now in a large way, local and domestic consumption of travel-oriented experiences has been immense, to the extent where in the cities which are open, we have been able to claw back to pre-COVID levels, which if you had asked me to bet on 12 months ago, I wouldn't have taken that bet, right? But we have been able to make that journey as a function of just the tremendous amount of pent-up demand that exists in these ecosystem. And partially also because we were then, I would say, evolving our offerings and our experiences to further closely match with what locals would want for their own cities or for their own regions and their own countries. So I think one is that. The second thing, which is a bit more nuanced, that we understood 4 to 5 months into the pandemic, is that from a regulatory and an external standpoint, there was a tremendous push to digitization, which is true worldwide, and especially true for a sector like ours, because ours is an exceptionally fragmented sector. The end provider is a super small business run by anywhere between 1 to 4 people. And the incentive for them to have a real-time system for reservations and allocations and so on and so forth is just very limited. But COVID sort of changed that in a pretty dramatic way. And we now have a situation where there's a huge backlog of people that want to sell online, not just on Headout, but in the overall ecosystem, that we are now waiting to onboard because we aren't able to sort of deal with the excess of supply side infusion. So I think in the digitization story, the story has been pushed forward by half a decade, if not more. And so these two reasons, or these two phenomena, I would say, gives us tremendous amount of optimism for what lies ahead. But we are under no misconception that this is over. We anticipate this pain to exist in a substantial way for the next 4 months, and in a meaningful way for the next 12 months. That's the expectation that we have, and I think we're being fairly accurate on that prediction, looking at the current vaccination rates and what numbers we need to reach to be able to get to a position where people can start traveling freely between states and between borders of countries.
At any point in time, okay, because I think we are seeing the second wave just like in the last month or so. At
Yeah.
any point in time, did you see some sort of recovery for your business, at least
Yeah.
in terms of pre-COVID levels? And
Yeah. So in cities which have been open, we have seen that to be true. We've been able to get back to pre-COVID levels, which has honestly been a huge relief. In cities which have not been completely open, I'll give you examples like Rome, which opened up for about a month and a half in February, and then went back into lockdown because their RT index went, above 1 again. In the spots where the cities have been open for, in the seesaw of openings and closings because of the constant sort of movement of cases up and down, especially in Europe, the windows where they've been open, we have done well. So I think every time we've seen that something is available, that something that's available has been able to find its audience. And so the real question has just been that, hey, can we get to a steady state where things can be open and available for an extended duration? If we can get there, then there is enough demand in the ecosystem to be able to cater to that supply. We don't doubt that anymore at all. Even with paranoia around COVID and safety and so on and so forth, I think people have realized the precautions they need to take. They are aware of the risks that they're taking. And in the context of all of those different variables, if things are open, people are going and indulging in travel related experiences. And so it's just a question of a city being open. If it is open, I think we're good. If it's not, then we just have to wait until it gets there. So the recovery is pretty strong, but it's subject to the case trends being negative, the RT being less than 1, and the government's keeping things open.
okay, when do you expect really for you to have volumes of 2019 levels? By the end of this year, maybe?
No, I would say that my reasonable estimation for that would be Q2 next year, spring next year.
Okay. Is that because it is dependent on a particular market which is looking challenging?
No, so for us, for example, the biggest market that we have or that we had pre-COVID was the US, right?
Right.
And the US is now coming back in a pretty substantial way because of the tremendous rate at which they're vaccinating, right? Um, The reason why I think it will take time is because for any travel company, whether it's Headout or anyone else, international travel forms a substantial chunk of their overall business. And international travel will take longer to recover compared to domestic travel. Domestic travel will be bigger now than it was in 2019, just because of lack of options and just the huge desire that exists in people to get out. But international travel will still not be there. And so that will have a dampening effect, which is why the assumption is that we need all the way until next spring, where enough cluster of cities or countries rather have been able to get to herd immunity in terms of vaccination rates, where countries as a total set have been able to vaccinate 65, 70% plus of their population, which then allows people to move between borders as long as they're completely vaccinated, have a vaccination proof point either as a certificate or something that's connected with their passport information and things like that.
Understood. How have you kept employees and the organization together in this time, Varun? And even the supply, like what
Yeah.
happened to supply? Yeah.
So I think the second one first. Suppliers have been dramatically hit. They also don't have access to capital as freely as tech-enabled companies do, right? And for them, free cash flow is very, very important and critical. And every squeeze that's happened in this scenario, especially because of refunds related escalations, and even they not getting money back from some of their other vendors and so on and so forth, has led to a thinning down of the total number of supply that's available in the market, especially in the experiences ecosystem, because these businesses are not necessarily asset backed, right? Unlike a hotel where you own the land or you own the entire property, uh, there are a lot of businesses and experiences which don't have a physical asset to be able to take loans off to be able to get by. So the total landscape has reduced. A lot of people have had to go look for other jobs as a stopgap solution to be able to survive, and that's been a real impact. And we saw that impact on Headout as well, where it did take us a significant amount of time to get the refund money back from our suppliers, which we had to pass to our customers, which we had passed as soon as it happened because we didn't want to, inconvenience our customers in any way. But we did have to wait for substantial periods to be able to get that money back from our suppliers. And in some cases, that money didn't come because the supplier didn't cease, just cease to exist. And those are losses that every company in travel has had to take. So I think from a supply ecosystem standpoint, it is true that it's thinned out. I do believe that they will come back as soon as travel recovers because it's a kind of a business where you can do that. And so, from an experience standpoint, I expect them to bounce back and get back into the thick of things as long as travel is back up, because of the lack of huge asset-based purchases that they need to do, and so that will just make this easier. But in the current ecosystem, yes, there is a tremendous impact on just jobs, right? Like just a lot of people have lost their jobs and companies have went bankrupt or shut down or have become zombie companies where they're not shut down, but nobody answers, nobody exists. It's just on standby. So that's a real, I would say, causality of this epidemic. On the first question, it's been a challenge, but something that I have been pleasantly surprised by. As you would expect, we did uh, put a chunk of the team on furlough in March when things went really south. We were able to get a decent percentage of that cohort of people back on our payroll sometime in July, August. And we have been sticking with that team, even though the revenues are not where they would be, just let's say as early as Feb, March 2020, we're still sticking with that team for two reasons. One, it's clear to us that when the recovery is available at full force in all cities, it's going to be once in a lifetime opportunity for us to do what we do really, really well. And we need to be prepped to be able to ensure that we don't screw that opportunity up and do right by our suppliers and our customers. And so there's a lot of fundamental sort of building block work that's going on for which we need that team, and we have done that. We also had a pay cut in place all the way until December of last year, which was a graded pay cut, starting from 0% for people below a certain pay grade to 5, 10, 15, and the max was at 30. And we kept that pay cut going, and the three of us as founders basically took 100% pay cut. So we kept that, which is still in effect. But we kept the pay cut going for the rest of the team all the way until December. But we reinstated all the salaries along with appraisals wherever applicable, starting Jan, because the recovery was now getting real, right? There was good data points available. We were starting to make revenues back up. Our bottom line improved through the pandemic because of a lot of the work that we had done. And we were also able to raise substantial financing to ensure that we are able to get through this, right? And do more than just getting through this. So I think from that perspective, we have been lucky that people identify with the mission. People are cognizant of what the recovery looks like because they can see that with numbers within Headout, and they see the kind of work that we have to do and the kind of impact it can create. So I think we've been lucky that we haven't had the kind of exodus that I was afraid of, honestly. As a founder, it gave me sleepless nights way more than I had anticipated at the beginning of March when the pandemic was just beginning to become a sort of a global phenomenon. But we have been incredibly lucky and blessed that the team sort of really identifies with it. And I think that's kind of where being a quirky bunch that, like, I mean, a lot of the parts of Headout culture is like just weird and not normal for a regular company. And I think like being that sort of that weird company helps in situations like these where people sort of really identify with it. We in fact even had cases where people have left because of pay cuts, etc. And I don't blame them for their financial situations, family needs, etc. And have now quit those companies and said, hey, listen, can we come back? Because of just the way that it is. So blessed, and fingers crossed that it stays that way. We still have some work to do and some pain to get through over the next 4 to 6 months, but so far so good.
Okay, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Let's take a couple of questions, but let's see what people are asking. Will domestic local demand dry up once borders open up again? That's a good question. What do you think?
No, it won't. One, the paranoia around going to a destination where less of the destination in a situation like COVID, where let's say you contract COVID or there is some lockdown that closes international borders, etc. That paranoia will exist for a decent duration of time until COVID becomes like as common as a common cold, right? So no, I don't imagine that it will dry up. There might be some impact, but honestly, if you ask me to take a bet, I would say that there's just so much desire for people to get out after everything they have been through. And there's also a lot of additional cash that's lying with people, especially in the urban centers of the developed economies. And also I would count a Bombay and a Bangalore and sort of people who are listening to this forum as a part of that cohort of people. There's a lot of additional cash that's lying with all of us that's waiting to be spent on. And I think people are just a lot more cognizant of the kind of things that they care about, what they would want to sort of spend that money on. So I think the total volume of travel will go up. The frequency with which people take so-called trips will go up. And that would mean that domestic travel will not get impacted with the opening of our borders. I would not take a bet that goes against that.
Okay, let's take one more. Ritansha is asking, with so much uncertainty around sustained recovery, since there are multiple waves of COVID, why will anyone join a travel-related company right now? Nice.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a question that we are grappling with every single day as we are trying to fill the gaps and grow the team from where we are right now. I think to me it boils down to two specific mindset questions, right? One is, how important do you believe is the idea of being able to go to a new place, meet new people, see new things, to the collective advancement of us as a society or us as a collection of people, right? How important do you think that is? And second, are you a person that gets excited when there is a lot to be built and you're sort of being able to get into something at a slightly more ground floor opportunity than something where things have already been figured out? So if today, for example, if you're trying to work at an edtech company, and I'm not dunking on anybody, all of the edtech companies, of course, are doing a great job there for good value. A lot of the problem statements there are either figured out or being figured out and will be figured out in the next 6 to 9 months, just because of the amount of attention that's being given there. So I think if a person relates to the importance of travel to us as a society, and if a person finds challenges exciting, then that person would find now to be the best time in the last few decades, I would say, to be able to build in travel. Um, just because people are so looking forward to it. And so the ability that you have to be able to create products and solutions that can make a difference to people around the world, in easing the negative effects of this pandemic and getting the society back on track, would be immense. So I think it's a question of mindset. If somebody relates to that mindset, then they would find this to be exciting. If they don't relate to both those things, not just one but both those items, then I think they will find it to be a lot more relevant to go work for fintech or edtech, and that's fine. It's We don't need everybody to come and work for Headout or for travel companies. We need people who identify with this specific construct to come and work for us.
It's tough, right, man? I mean, if you look at all of the unicorns which have been created in just like last 2 months, right, 3 months,
Yeah,
to be a travel startup in that time, and this amount of cash infusion, to build a core company, it's tough. I'm sure.
it's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you are not a part of a tailwind or a sector that has a tremendous amount of tailwind, it's always tougher because you're fighting against the tide, right? Um, it will need you to articulate that the tailwind exists, it's out in the future when the recovery happens. And so building needs to happen for it to today for you to be able to take benefit of that tailwind. And so if you relate to the mission, and if you are not joining simply because you believe that now is good, not a good time to join for travel, 12 months down the line would be a bit too late. Like now would be a great time to build for the next 12 months to be able to benefit from the tailwind, the kind that EdTech has benefited from the start of the pandemic. So I think that slightly longer term horizon needs to be factored into people's thinking when they're considering these opportunities. And it's not easy. You are absolutely right. I face this problem every day when I'm trying to convince people to join us, and it's an uphill battle. So I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but to the right set of people, I think it would make a tremendous amount of sense.
Is it more difficult in Bangalore, if I can ask, Varun? Purely because a lot of money and companies flowing there in terms of talent or
It
hiring?
could have been true before COVID, but since COVID, we kind of don't care about Bangalore anymore as far as hiring is concerned. So I think in general, the skill sets where the supply is limited and the demand is very high, those skill sets are in vogue. The talent in those specific areas are expensive, and we just have to accept that as a reality, which we have. Um, so we are not afraid of paying what a person deserves based on supply and demand economics. Like that's fair. I think the question is that if we are matching what they would be getting, are they convinced that coming here would help them build a great career, grow, learn, and do all of that? So I think that's the current question mark that travel companies need to answer to people who are approaching them. But it is difficult to expect in India at this point in time to be able to get people by paying them lesser than what other options that they have. Practically speaking, that won't happen. And so you need to match, but you also then need to find a way to convince them saying, hey, listen, why is now a good time to join us versus an edtech or a fintech or any other such company that's behind that has a lot of tailwinds behind them.
Mm. What's your take on India, man? Every passing day, shit looks scarier than yesterday. Is that your reading too?
I'm personally a bit ashamed uh, at the situation and just how bad it is. I wouldn't use this forum to try and indulge in a blame game because I don't find it productive as a conversation as an individual. But it's just shameful as to how bad it is, um, and it's just shameful as to how unprepared we are. So I think you're reading that it's. I mean, I think any sort of adjective that we use to explain the situation is not going to be enough, right? And it's also clear that it's going to get worse before it gets better. Um, Different people will have different numbers and different timelines. 5 lakh cases a day, 6 lakh sometime in middle of May, sometime at the end of May, sometime in June. I don't know. I think everybody is speaking off the hip to some extent, because you had similar predictions being made earlier as well, and they don't pan out. And I'm not judging them for that. It's difficult to model this, so I get it. Um, the short answer is that it is going to get worse, and I think we need to just be mentally prepared for it. But the situation is as bad as it gets. It's shameful. We need to right now focus on fixing what can be fixed and salvaging what we can salvage. And once we are done with this, which we will be, it's a question of when and not if, right? I don't know if that's going to be 2 months. I don't know if that's going to be 4. I don't know if that's going to be 6. I hope it's as early as it can be. Um, but once it is done, there's a serious conversation to be had in terms of the percentage of GDP that we're spending on healthcare, and what we are doing to ensure that this doesn't get repeated. I think the worry that I have outside of the immediate worry of what happens to my loved ones and people around us of not getting beds and supplies and so on and so forth is that we will forget that this happened a year down the line and not learn from these mistakes and not fix the health infra that like it's supposed to. So that's my worry. That's kind of like what just doesn't leave a great taste in my mind, in my mouth. But yeah, I'm just hoping that we get through this sooner than later. But I don't have any huge positive thing to say right now in terms of hey, we'll be like this is fine. Like I don't think that's accurate. But I do feel optimistic that we'll get through this. I just don't know what is the damage that we are going to pay for until we sort of get to the other side. I don't know what that is, and I don't think it's going to be a palatable damage that we'll be okay with, whichever way you slice and dice it.
Right. Um, Obviously, I won't add to that because I think you've explained it well. What is your exposure to the India market in terms of business? Has it ever been fairly high?
No, it's not been fairly high. India is one of our top 20 markets, but the percentage of the total business that India drives for us is in low single digit percentage points. So it's not a very significant market for us in terms of where the customers come from. And we also are not present on the ground in India in terms of us not servicing any of the cities in India at this point in time. Um, it's a substantial market for certain head out cities like Dubai, where by definition, Dubai's largest inbound segment is Indians. And so by that logic, the same is true for Dubai, for head out as well. But no, we don't have tremendous amount of exposure here, which is kind of why, we discussed this even on the chat the other day, where it's a funny scenario for me, where my business is getting better right now because of Europe and US opening up, Australia getting back on track, and just the directional movement in all the countries around the world, with some very limited exceptions, is pointing in the right way, right? And we are benefiting from that. But where I am right now, where my family is, where a large chunk of Headout's team is, their shit is worse than it ever has been. So it's kind of like a weird place where it's easier for us to raise financing today. It's easier for us to grow. All of those things are easing up, relatively speaking. But my team and my mood and what I see around me is not. And so I'm living in this weird, uh, confusing world where I'm not able to relate to that happiness that I would get normally from sort of the business that is recovering, which we have been waiting for, desperately since the last 12 odd months.
Yeah. Let's take a couple of questions, Varun. I'll get back to
Yeah.
Europe because I think that's interesting. Okay, we'll go right. Is Headout going to do anything differently on the experiences offered by them to build trust in hygiene and COVID safety measures?
Yeah. So we already have a program live where today, if you go on Headout and you look at any single experience, we tell you that this experience has been verified by us in terms of the safety measures that they take. And when you click on that modal, it tells you the exact list of measures that they're taking. So we have in total about 10 measures, everything from sanitation boxes to temperature checks to face masks to mandatory masks, and so on and so forth. So we look at all of those and we verify every single one of those parameters with every experience provider. Um, each one of them will have a different assortment of which ones they apply based on their local regulations and their own comfort levels and so on and so forth. And we make sure that we communicate that to the end consumer. So before you make a reservation on Headout, you can see exactly what is being followed and what is not being followed. And you can then take an informed decision of whether that is enough for you to be able to sort of make sense. I think that is one. Second, there is a natural change in the type of experiences that find resonance. Experiences which are outdoor in nature are considered safer and naturally sell well today than they used to before COVID. Um, Cities which have gotten very good vaccination rates, or where the new case incidences are, with a negative trend with very, very small numbers, then those cities, people don't care. And so things are completely fine there. They don't even care about safety measures because it's just not a relevant problem statement. If you look at countries or cities like, Singapore, it's just not something that matters because their new caseload is about 10 to 20. And there's a tremendous amount of faith that the government will trace those 20, make sure that they are quarantined. And so nothing sort of goes out over and above that. So it's a case by case basis, but we did this massive exercise, which is still ongoing, where every experience on Headout needs to have a verified list of what safety measures they're taking, which is available for the consumers before they make a reservation.
Okay. There's a question from Neha. It's an interesting question. I just want to take this and see what you think of it. Yeah, Neha is asking, do you think industry would be more cognizant of underserved travelers post the pandemic, like persons with disabilities or LGBTQ community? Um,
Sadly, I think the answer is I I don't think it's going to be very different than what it was pre-COVID, because when the recovery is in place, it's going to be a bit of a waterfall, and people will just be trying to ensure that they're keeping their heads above to manage with what's going on. So in the short to medium term, I would say no, which is unfortunate, but that's what I would predict. In the slightly longer term horizon, with just more and more travel companies starting in the world, I think it logically makes sense that they will start looking at underserved segments of customers and start solving for them. So if we take a long-term view and say that, listen, travel as an activity or as a phenomenon will only keep getting more pervasive inside the society, more and more people will get prosperous. As the world gets more prosperous, they will then use that money and that time to be able to spend on travel and experience the world that we live in. If we take that long-term view, then that means that that bump in demand, or that evolution of demand, will be supplemented with evolution of supply. There'll be more supply, more businesses, more options, and it's logical for me to assume that there'll be businesses that will then start serving specific pockets, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's Islamic travel around Hajj, whether it is religious travel, so on and so forth. There are various pockets which aren't as well served using technology as they should be. And I would imagine that will happen over a long enough horizon. But I don't feel especially optimistic about this in the short term. In the next 1 to 3 years, I don't feel like it will make a big difference.
Right. Okay, there's one question right at the top. Came in pretty early, so I didn't get to it. How would the travel marketplace startups rebounds or be on track after second wave of COVID-19?
So if you talk about India, it is going to be a complete washout for the next 3 months at the very least, and potentially for the next 6 months. Um, it's just a reality that companies will have to accept and live with, right? Uh, I don't think they can do very much about that, unfortunately, because it's a variable that's not in their control in any sense whatsoever. What they can do, which is in their control, is ensure that they survive this through whatever means possible. Because the other side of this looks exceptionally pleasing to me, but you need to be able to sort of get through this, which will involve taking dramatically difficult decisions. And entrepreneurs and teams which do that earlier than the rest, and use this relative downtime to build what needs to be built, will be okay. But I would personally ask every single one of them to ensure that they survive this. Like, that should be their only focus. there is nothing that you can do about the next 3 to 6 months. It's just not in your control, and that's a lost cause to fight.
I know we didn't sort of speak about it last year, but again, right? I mean, the whole Airbnb IPO in
Yeah,
the middle of all of this was just such a big moment for the sector, isn't it?
yeah.
Like for me, I thought that it was a significant validation of the potential of the market and probably coming out of the worst time ever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it tells you that there will never be a time in our society where travel is not something that people seek, not something that people want. And that is only going to get bigger and better as the world gets more prosperous, as people's incomes rise, as people get out of poverty and start moving up the ladder. That is going to be the de facto state of the world, and that will only keep improving. So I think the Airbnb IPO is a great testament to the long term future of what travel means. It's a great recognition of how important the industry is as well. I think a lot of times, because of the so-called leisure slash non-utility nature of travel, it doesn't get the attention or the respect it deserves, right? It's a sector that drives about 8% of the world's GDP, 11-12% of the world's jobs. That's quite a lot. And but it never becomes like, if you, I mean, an example would be if you look at the tourism ministers that we have had in the country, without looking at specific examples, whether at a state level or at a central level, it tells you that you just, like, whoever is like the best of the rest gets that portfolio, and that's kind of because, like, just nobody cares. And I think that's a real travesty. And so I think I'm hoping that big milestones like an Airbnb IPO tells you about why travel is important and why it has an extremely um, good future ahead of it. So it was a huge validation. Doesn't mean that everything in travel is solved. Doesn't mean that every company in travel will be successful. But it does tell you that if you solve something that's meaningful, then it's a great sector to be.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see if there's anything left. Then I'll come to your investors, who I'm very keen to see why they've given you more money. Uh, there's a show who has this question, right? What kind of assurances do you offer travelers to set their apprehensions about dislocations at rest? Right. Okay. Have people found themselves in this position?
Yeah, they have, and we have had to uh, go above and beyond to make sure that they get their refunds as quickly as possible. They are being made aware, and we've taken losses here that we wouldn't want to. Since it's a closed forum, I would love to sort of talk about this, right? So, for example, we spend an enormous amount of money on Google for advertising, like most commerce companies would. When COVID happened and we refunded millions of dollars, and I mean millions when I say millions, the expenditure that we had accrued to be able to get that customer in the first place through marketing, etc., was a lost cause, right? That's dead. But we have had to refund that customer, including the margin that we made, which is why we justified the marketing that we did. And we had to do that before we got that money from the supplier. And we had to do that even though we were not getting the support from the marketing companies that continue to make a tremendous amount of money through the pandemic. Um, and we did it because it was the right thing to do. We felt an enormous amount of responsibility towards our customers in times like these to ensure that they do not lose trust and faith, not just in Headout, but in the broader travel ecosystem, because that would be a catastrophic sort of eventuality that we are not okay with. So we did do that. What we are doing today is twofold. One, we are working extremely hard to convert as many experiences on Headout as possible to what we call a flexible cancellation policy, where you can cancel and get complete refund 24 hours before the start of the experience. So if you couldn't travel from place A to place B because of restrictions, um, government closures, etc., then you can let us know 24 hours in advance and we will refund the entire amount to you. It's complicated because we've had to work with our suppliers to make sure that these policies are put in place and they agree to it. But it's something that needs to be done because it's the only way that you can reinforce that trust and let people say, hey, listen, make your purchases. If things go wrong, then we'll take care of it, right? Um, the second thing that we have done essentially is just worked tremendously hard on ensuring that there's no backlog from a customer support perspective, even though we are in a position where we've had to trim down the team after March. we have ensured that our customer response times don't go down, and we are able to get customers what they want, because that anxiety right now is at its all-time high for reasons which are completely justifiable. And so we have taken that exceptional step to say that we will not underinvest in support, which at times seems like an expense item and not a revenue item, right? But we've taken that call because we believe that that expense item is what's going to create revenue for tomorrow. And so we ensure that our TATs remain less than 20 minutes for any query that you get. Make sure that we go above and beyond to fix issues for people as and when they occur. And if they face constraints which are outside of our control, where they aren't able to travel, then we get them their money back as quickly as we possibly can.
Right, right. How did you manage your investors, Varun, for the last year and a half? How did
Yeah, so we have been lucky. Based on our conversations with some of the other travel companies, this wouldn't be the normal average scenario everywhere. But we have been very lucky with the investors that we have had: Nexus, Version One, FJ Labs, etc.
right,
That have a tremendous amount of faith, first in the team, that we are able to get through any problem statement that's thrown at us and find a way out of it. And that's been helpful because they've known us for a good amount of time. And that faith that we've been able to create has held us in good stead right now. And two, with the numbers that we have been able to showcase in cities which have opened up, and with all the macro picture that they're able to see, they clearly are extremely bullish about the recovery. Uh, they question the timelines between them. We would argue, hey, listen, is it going to be Q3 of this year? Is it going to be Q4? Is it going to be Q1? Is it going to be Q2?
right.
We don't know that. That's an argument that's a never-ending cycle until the world sort of gets back. But the fact that it will happen is a conclusion that everybody agrees on. And basis that conclusion and basis the faith that they have in what we have done in the past, uh, gave them that confidence to be able to say that, hey, listen, um, let's ensure that they don't just have money for survival, but we invest enough that they are able to forward invest in what they need to be able to build and get out there. And it's not just about internal investors. We've also been able to raise substantial money from new investors who are again having that same macro picture, that they believe that travel will be able to make a tremendous comeback in 2022 and beyond. And it's a question of backing the right horse. So I think money is available today for travel. It's not the easiest conversation like some of the other sectors would, but it is available. And all you need as a company is a few investors who believe in you. You don't need every single investor out there to say yes. So if I was a travel founder, I would encourage them to not be disappointed, to not be discouraged, and to go out there and look for it, because the money does exist, and people are willing to take bets. That's been our experience, and I think that can be the experience of a lot of people with what they have seen with Airbnb's IPO, with the vaccination rates in the US, with the US opening up. There is enough positive news out there to say that we will get through this, and that demands a good look for an investment.
What was the divergence, let's say, in your plans, in the last round of fundraising,
Yeah,
compared to what you had laid out? Because you've been around for a while now,
right,
compared to the disruption and now what you need to do
right.
going forward. What was the divergence in sort of?
Yeah, so there were two specific items that had to evolve, I would say, not diverge as much as evolve in terms of the way that we looked at it. Our focus pre-COVID was on expansion, right? We wanted to get to 200 cities as quickly as we could.
Right.
And that was the focus of what we had in mind. And a large chunk of our business was coming from international tourists. And so that meant that we wanted to go as horizontal as we can to cover as many destinations as we can. The divergence that's happened as a function of COVID is twofold. One, we have taken a conscious stand to slow down the pace of expansion.
Okay.
And that has been a function of the fact that the world itself is not open, right? And so it doesn't make sense for us to be available everywhere today. We can do this more gradually as the world opens up in a gradual fashion. The second divergence is that it's clear that travel is going to be more local and domestic for a decent duration. We don't expect international travel to come back to its pre-COVID levels for a while, I would say, right? Um, and we believe that local and domestic tourism will be higher than pre-COVID levels. And so that means that there has been reconsideration of going deeper in the existing markets to serve a more local, more domestic use case. Uh, to open up more experiences which are of the variety and of the flavor that cater to that audiences. So depth and breadth of experiences in that same city or in that same region has been the renewed focus, which has been a stark difference than what was the case sort of before COVID happened. So I think that's the strategic shift that we've had to make in tune with what the change in consumer behavior has been.
Right. Okay, this is my final question, and we haven't sort of discussed this before, but in the travel landscape, which is which is a large breadth now, which is the aggregators like MakeMyTrip and obviously companies like Oyo and all of that,
Right.
which have seen quite a lot of pain. So have you, but I mean, both of them have seen quite a lot of pain. How do you sort of view their business models going forward, if you have spent any time on looking at those companies?
I actually remain quite bullish on both MakeMyTrip and Oyo. MakeMyTrip will generally benefit from return of travel because it's a general platform for all travel needs, flights, hotels, etc. And so, by definition, when people start traveling again, their consumption will go back up. And MakeMyTrip is a one-stop destination to be able to sort of serve those needs in an ecosystem where competition is getting thinned out, Cleartrip disappearing, etc., etc. I think MakeMyTrip's position only gets better and better. So I would be a buyer of MakeMyTrip stock in a few months from now.
Right.
As far as Oyo is concerned, they will again tremendously benefit from domestic tourism in India, which would tell you that, as people start to travel, because of the fact that Oyo is a trusted, low-cost brand that helps them get a safe accommodation, especially in the times of sort of COVID, where the problems of unknowns gets exaggerated. I think people will find them inclined to sort of work with brands or go to brands that they are more aware of. And I think Oyo will benefit from that that in the budget sector. I don't have as much visibility into Oyo's businesses outside of India. I know there were concerns in US, they were doing well in China, etc., etc. So I think we'll have to look at Oyo as a business on a per country level. I'm not sure if there's a single answer for what Oyo or how this will impact Oyo globally. I think the answer will differ on a country by country basis. And so certain countries they will benefit, certain countries they may not. In a place like US, because they're a newer brand, maybe that goes against them. In a place like India, where they're an established brand, that goes in their favor. So that's how I would look at Oyo. I think I would look at this more regionally than as a one sort of global scope.
Makes total sense. I think we have finished our time. I'll just see if there's any question left.
Sure.
Okay. No, I think mostly we've covered everything. So I guess we are good. Hey, you take care of your health. Thanks so much for taking the time out to do this. Yeah.
Of course, my pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks everyone who joined the session. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks everyone. Stay safe.
See you. Bye.